Your daily routine is basically a crime spree. You just have the good fortune of living in the right century. We're about to show you a world where singing in the shower, owning too many potatoes, or playing pinball could make you a public enemy. These aren't just obscure rules from dusty books. This is a catalog of history at its most bafflingly idiotic. 1. Imagine yourself in 19th century Pennsylvania, unwinding in a hot bath. You're feeling relaxed, maybe a little joyful, so you start singing your favorite tune. Suddenly, a constable is at your door. Why? Because an old municipal law actually made it illegal to sing in the bathtub. This wasn't a noble effort to protect the public from terrible singers. The official reasoning was that the sound might startle horses on the street outside. Think about the chain of events someone had to imagine to write this law. A man starts humming an opera in his tub. A horse 2 blocks away hears it, panics, and causes a catastrophic carriage pileup. It's a level of cause and effect reasoning that is both insane and magnificent. It also implies the existence of a special division of law enforcement dedicated to monitoring bathroom acoustics. 2. In most parts of the world, forgetting your wife's birthday gets you the silent treatment or a night on the sofa. But in the modern-day island nation of Samoa, it can get you a court summons. That's right, it is genuinely, legally, and enforceably against the law for a husband to forget his wife's special day. If a wife chooses to report this transgression, her husband can be officially questioned, warned, and even fined by the authorities. This is not some forgotten ancient text. This is a contemporary attempt to legislate thoughtfulness. You have to admire the ambition. It transforms a simple domestic oversight into a matter of state security. One can only imagine the courtroom drama. Your Honor, he claimed his phone calendar mysteriously deleted the reminder. The prosecution rests. 3. Today, pinball is a nostalgic arcade classic. But from the 1940s all the way to 1976, it was public enemy number 1 in New York City. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia waged a personal, almost fanatical war against these machines, convinced they were a mechanical menace and a gateway to ruin. He saw them not as games of skill, but as insidious gambling devices controlled by the mafia to corrupt the city's youth and drain their lunch money. He famously led theatrical raids, smashing confiscated pinball machines with a sledgehammer for press photographers. For decades, pinball was driven underground. The ban was only lifted after a pinball wizard named Roger Sharp, in a legendary courtroom performance, proved it was a game of skill by calling a specific shot and then making it, stunning the council into submission. 4. In 19th century Britain, your choice of Halloween costume could have led to your arrest. The Vagrancy Act of 1824 was a broad piece of legislation targeting fortune tellers, con artists, and anyone using subtle craft to deceive the public. This was the era of spiritualism and seances, where fake mediums would stage hauntings to swindle grieving families. The law was designed to stop them, but its wonderfully vague wording made it illegal for anyone to pretend to be a ghost, spirit, or other supernatural being. This meant that while the law was aimed at sophisticated fraudsters, it technically also applied to a child with a bedsheet over their head, saying, "Woo." It created a hilarious legal gray area between professional spectral impersonation and just being spooky for fun. 5. In old New York City, cleanliness was next to godliness, but it operated on a very strict timetable. A city ordinance made it illegal to shake out your rugs, carpets, or mats from a window after 8 a.m. If you wanted to share your apartment's accumulated dust and debris with the world below, you had to be an early riser. This was a practical attempt to prevent pedestrians from getting an unwelcome shower of grime on their way to work. It paints an incredible picture of a daily urban ritual. At 7:59 a.m., a frantic citywide symphony of rug flapping, followed by an abrupt, coordinated silence the moment the clock struck 8. It was a race against time where the prize was a clean floor and the penalty was living in filth until the next morning. 6. New Jersey has a reputation for some interesting local quirks, but one of its cities took things to a new level by legislating table manners. A local ordinance once officially made it illegal to slurp your soup in public. You have to respect the sheer audacity of a government body deciding that while crime and infrastructure are issues, the real threat to civil society is the noise someone makes while enjoying a bowl of tomato soup. It transforms every diner into a potential crime scene. Imagine undercover officers listening intently for the telltale sound, ready to spring into action. While it was likely never enforced with jail time, the fact that a group of lawmakers sat down, debated, and passed this into law is a beautiful testament to humanity's ability to focus on what truly matters. 7. If you've ever been told you can't carry a tune in a bucket, you would have been a wanted criminal in one North Carolina town. An old city law made it explicitly illegal to sing out of tune. This wasn't about public performances. This applied to singing in general. It's a law that is both hilarious and existentially terrifying. How would it be enforced? Would they have a pitch police squad roaming the streets with tuning forks, ready to issue citations for flat notes? Imagine the courtroom scene. The prosecution presents Exhibit A, a witness who heard the defendant's horrifyingly sharp rendition of a popular folk song. It represents a utopian and frankly terrifying vision of a world where musical mediocrity is not just frowned upon, but actively prosecuted. 8. France is celebrated as the world's capital of romance, which makes this particular law a masterpiece of irony. In the early 20th century, it was forbidden to kiss on train platforms. This wasn't a moral crusade against public displays of affection. It was a desperate measure to maintain the national train schedule. Apparently, couples were engaging in such long, passionate, cinematic farewells that they were regularly causing significant delays. The railway authorities were forced to choose between love and on-time performance, and efficiency won. It is the most wonderfully French problem imaginable. The country's infrastructure was being brought to its knees by the sheer power of romance. Conductors had to become love police, breaking up embraces to ensure the 2:15 to Lyon could depart as scheduled. 9. In the late 17th century, Tsar Peter the Great of Russia embarked on a mission to modernize his country and drag it, kicking and screaming, into the Western world. And his first major target was facial hair. He saw the long, traditional beards of Russian men as a symbol of old-fashioned backwardness. So, in 1698, he introduced a beard tax. If you wanted to keep your glorious beard, you had to pay up. Upon payment, you received a special copper token, basically a beard license, that you had to carry at all times. If you were caught with an unlicensed beard, the police would publicly and forcibly shave you on the spot. It was a brutal war on hipster aesthetics centuries ahead of its time, and a state-sponsored attack on the very concept of a majestic flowing beard. 10. Today, it's an indispensable eating utensil, but in the 11th century, the fork was seen as a scandalous and blasphemous invention. When a Byzantine princess brought a golden fork to Italy for her wedding, the clergy was horrified. The argument against it was theological. God had given humans 10 natural utensils, their fingers. To use an artificial, pointy instrument was seen as an insult to the divine design. One influential cleric even preached that the fork was a diabolical luxury, and that using it was a sign of excessive pride. When the princess later died from the plague, it was widely declared to be divine punishment for her unnatural, fork-using ways. It's a powerful reminder that one generation's essential tool is another's satanic implement. 11. In 18th century England, a man carrying an umbrella was an object of public ridicule and even aggression. At the time, umbrellas were considered a French affectation and a sign of weakness, strictly for women. A real man was expected to endure the rain with stoic resolve, or at most, a sturdy hat. When the philanthropist Jonas Hanway became one of the first men to consistently use an umbrella in London, he was mocked and insulted daily for over 30 years. The most violent opposition came from the drivers of horse-drawn cabs, who saw the umbrella as a direct threat to their business. After all, if people could stay dry while walking, who would pay for a ride? They would intentionally splash Hanway with mud and shout abuse, all because of his portable rain shield. 12. The humble potato is now a global staple, but when it first arrived in France, it was treated with extreme suspicion and fear. In fact, in 1748, the French Parliament officially banned the cultivation of potatoes. Why? Because they were widely believed to be poisonous and, incredibly, to cause leprosy. Medical experts of the time claimed these strange tubers were fit only for pigs and criminals. This anti-potato hysteria was so strong that it took a brilliant publicity campaign by an army pharmacist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier to change public opinion. He famously planted a field of potatoes guarded by soldiers during the day, which he then had the guards abandon at night, correctly assuming that people would sneak in to steal what they thought was valuable: royal food. 13. We're not done with potato-related crimes. In a far more modern example of legislative weirdness, it was once illegal in Western Australia to be in possession of more than 50 kilograms of potatoes. This wasn't some ancient law. This was enforced by the Potato Marketing Corporation Act of 1946. This powerful government body had the authority to control the potato market, and to enforce their rules, they could stop and search any vehicle they suspected of potato smuggling. If you were caught with an illicit stash of spuds, they could be confiscated. It created a black market for potatoes and the absurd image of potato police pulling over cars on the highway, not looking for drugs or weapons, but for an illegal surplus of baking potatoes. 14. While most of the laws on this list are silly, this one takes a much darker turn, revealing how art can be seen as a genuine threat. In both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, abstract art was effectively illegal. Both totalitarian regimes, despite being on opposite ends of the political spectrum, shared a profound hatred for art that didn't conform to their rigid ideologies. The Nazis labeled it degenerate art, claiming it was a product of Jewish and Bolshevik corruption that polluted the national spirit. The Soviets called it bourgeois formalism, a decadent and meaningless distraction from the glorious task of building communism. Artists were persecuted, their works were confiscated or destroyed, and only state-approved, heroic realism was permitted. It's a chilling reminder of how autocrats fear anything they can't easily control. 15. During the German occupation of Paris in World War II, the Nazis banned the publication of crossword puzzles. On the surface, it seems like a bizarrely petty restriction. But the German command had a very specific and paranoid reason for it. They feared that the puzzles could be used by the French resistance to pass coded messages. A seemingly innocent clue could contain hidden instructions, or the pattern of filled squares could spell out secret information. The British intelligence services were actually known to use crossword enthusiasts as code breakers at Bletchley Park, so the fear wasn't entirely unfounded. It turned a simple morning pastime into a potential tool of espionage, making every crossword puzzle a potential threat to national security. 16. Imagine a king so concerned with national defense that he makes bowling illegal. That's exactly what King Edward III of England did in the 14th century. He issued a proclamation banning a whole host of popular games, including a lawn bowling game known as bowls, for a very specific reason. They were distracting his subjects from archery practice. With the 100 Years' War against France raging, England needed every able-bodied man to be a proficient archer. The king believed that men were spending too much time rolling balls on a lawn and not enough time practicing with their longbows. So, he outlawed their hobbies to force them back to the archery range. It was a nationwide stop having fun and get back to work order, with national security as the justification. 17. Fashion trends can be controversial, but it's rare for them to become a matter of national law. Welcome to 14th century England, a time of such extreme footwear obsession that the government had to step in. The trend in question was the Krakow, or poulain, a shoe with an absurdly long pointed toe. These points grew longer and longer as a status symbol, sometimes extending up to 2 feet beyond the actual foot, making it nearly impossible to walk. The church condemned them as satanic and immoral, while critics claimed they were just plain ridiculous. Finally, in 1463, King Edward IV passed a law limiting the length of a shoe's point to a mere 2 inches. It was an official, government-mandated war on footwear that was deemed too scandalous for the kingdom. 18. In many cultures, certain colors are associated with royalty, but the Aztec Empire took this to an entirely different level. There, the color yellow was strictly and exclusively reserved for the emperor himself. This wasn't just a suggestion or a fashion guideline. It was a rigidly enforced law. Wearing yellow was a capital offense because the color was directly associated with the sun, a major deity, and by extension, with the emperor, who was seen as its representative on Earth. For an ordinary citizen to wear yellow was an act of profound blasphemy and treason, as if they were trying to impersonate a god. It's perhaps the most extreme example of a dress code in history, where choosing the wrong color for your outfit wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was a death sentence. 19. There is perhaps no one in history who hated fun more than Oliver Cromwell. After the English Civil War, this puritanical leader and his government set out to abolish anything they considered frivolous or immoral, and at the top of their hit list was Christmas itself. In 1647, Parliament officially banned the celebration of Christmas, and along with it, one of its most delicious traditions, the mince pie. These pies were seen as a symbol of pagan gluttony and Catholic excess. Soldiers were known to patrol the streets of London, confiscating any mince pies they could find by force. For over a decade, celebrating Christmas with festive food was a subversive, illegal act. It was a government-sponsored war on holiday cheer, led by a man who apparently thought joy was a sin. 20. Your daily coffee ritual is a modern necessity, but in 16th century Mecca, it was a criminal activity. When coffee was first introduced, it became wildly popular, and coffee houses sprang up across the city. But the authorities grew deeply suspicious of these new establishments. They weren't just places to drink a beverage, they were becoming vibrant hubs for intellectual discussion, political debate, and gossip. The governor of Mecca, fearing that these caffeinated conversations could breed sedition and dissent, declared coffee and coffee houses to be illegal in 1511. The city's coffee supply was burned, and anyone caught drinking it could be punished. The ban was short-lived, but it stands as a perfect example of a government being terrified by the simple power of people getting together to talk. 21. In the Soviet Union, the state controlled everything, including what you were allowed to listen to. For decades, most forms of Western music were strictly forbidden. Genres like jazz and later rock and roll were officially condemned as bourgeois or capitalist propaganda, designed to corrupt the minds of Soviet youth. Owning a Beatles record or a Rolling Stones album was a risky act of rebellion. Secret music on the Bones clubs would emerge, where forbidden tracks were crudely etched onto old X-ray films to be distributed on the black market. Getting caught with this music could have serious consequences, from public shaming to being expelled from university or losing your job. It was a system where a simple pop song was treated as a dangerous piece of ideological contraband. 22. You would think that providing children with a place to learn, play, and socialize would be universally seen as a good thing. But in 1851, the government of Prussia thought it was a terrible idea. They officially banned all kindergartens. The reasoning behind this was pure political paranoia. The authorities feared that these early education centers, which were often run by liberal-minded educators, were breeding grounds for dangerous ideas. They were convinced that kindergartens would raise a generation of atheists, revolutionaries, and freethinkers who would one day threaten the conservative order of the state. So, for nearly a decade, the simple act of sending your 5-year-old to play with blocks and learn the alphabet was deemed a threat to national security, a truly mind-boggling stance against early education. 23. Before the internet and the telephone, the fastest way to send a message was via carrier pigeon. These birds were the high-speed broadband of the medieval world, and because of their immense strategic value, their ownership was strictly controlled. In medieval England, only the nobility were legally permitted to own and raise carrier pigeons. For a commoner to do so was a serious crime. This law ensured that the control of long-distance communication remained firmly in the hands of the ruling class. It gave them a massive advantage in everything from military intelligence to business dealings. A peasant owning a carrier pigeon was seen as a potential spy or a threat, to the established information monopoly. It was the medieval equivalent of banning the public from using the internet. 24. The ancient Spartans are famous for their brutal military training, disciplined society, and concise, no-nonsense speech. Their culture valued strength and practicality above all else, and they had no time for anything they considered weak or frivolous. This even extended to poetry. In Sparta, rhyming poetry was effectively forbidden. While other Greek city-states were producing beautiful epic poems and lyrical verses, the Spartans saw rhyming as an effeminate and unnecessary indulgence. The only form of poetry they allowed were simple, rhythmic marching hymns and patriotic chants designed to inspire soldiers in battle. Anything with artistic flair, emotional depth, or a clever rhyme scheme was rejected as a distraction from a warrior's duty. It was a culture that literally outlawed artistic expression. 25. Fireworks are synonymous with celebration today, but in medieval China, where they were invented, playing with them could get you in serious trouble. Gunpowder was one of the most significant inventions in history, and for centuries, its formula was a jealously guarded state secret. The Tang dynasty emperors understood its immense military potential and classified it as top-secret technology. Consequently, the private use of fireworks by ordinary citizens was strictly forbidden. All gunpowder production was under imperial control, and spectacular firework displays were reserved exclusively for the emperor and state-sponsored ceremonies. For a commoner to possess gunpowder, even for a small celebration, was seen as a potential act of treason. It was like trying to build your own military-grade drone in your backyard today. The government really didn't appreciate it. 26. In the Roman Empire, your interest in the future could get you executed. While astrology and fortune-telling were common, there was one topic that was absolutely, unequivocally off-limits: the emperor's health and lifespan. Consulting an astrologer to ask when the emperor might die was considered an act of high treason. The logic was simple and brutal. If you're asking about the emperor's death, you're probably plotting it. This law was used by paranoid emperors to eliminate political rivals and anyone they remotely distrusted. A simple, curious question could be twisted into a full-blown conspiracy, leading to your arrest, torture, and a very public, very painful execution. It made small talk with your local soothsayer an incredibly high-stakes game. 27. Most of us have worried about the consequences of cheating on a test: a failing grade, a suspension, maybe an angry call to our parents. But in Bangladesh, the stakes are considerably higher. Under a national law, students aged 15 and older who are caught cheating on their final exams can be sent to prison. This isn't just a theoretical threat. Every year during exam season, news reports feature stories of students, and sometimes even parents, being arrested for their involvement in cheating scandals. The government takes academic integrity so seriously that it's willing to give teenagers a criminal record for smuggling notes into an exam hall. It's a powerful deterrent that makes you think twice about writing formulas on your arm, and it elevates the stress of final exams to a whole new level. 28. In today's world, banking and loans are the engine of the economy. But in medieval Europe, one of the fundamental principles of finance, charging interest, was considered a mortal sin. The practice, known as usury, was condemned by the Catholic Church as a violation of God's law. The argument was that lending money was an act of Christian charity, and to profit from it was to exploit another's misfortune. Furthermore, theologians argued that charging interest was like selling time, which belonged only to God. This religious prohibition was so strong that for centuries, the entire financial industry in Christian Europe was forced to operate in the shadows, often run by non-Christian groups who weren't bound by the church's laws. It was a time when making a profit was literally a sin. 29. Following the same bizarre logic that banned charging interest, the act of insuring a ship or its cargo was also considered sinful in parts of medieval Europe. When maritime trade began to flourish, merchants desperately needed a way to mitigate the enormous risks of storms, pirates, and shipwrecks. But the church had a problem with it. The concept of insurance was seen as a form of gambling, and more specifically, gambling against God. A storm wasn't a random weather event. It was an act of God's will. To take out an insurance policy was to bet that God's will would be destructive, and to try to profit from it was seen as deeply blasphemous. Merchants were expected to pray and trust in divine providence, not rely on a financial contract. 30. In many medieval European towns and cities, simply being outside after dark could make you a criminal. Once the sun went down and the city gates were locked, a strict curfew was enforced. Anyone found walking the streets was labeled a night walker and could be arrested by the local watch. The authorities believed that no good ever came from being out at night. The darkness was thought to be a cloak for criminals, drunks, and other morally questionable characters. If you were a law-abiding citizen, you were expected to be at home, behind a locked door. The very act of taking a late-night stroll was seen as inherently suspicious. It was a world without nightlife, where the simple freedom to walk around after sunset was a privilege you didn't have. 31. For centuries, progress in the field of medicine was severely handicapped by one powerful taboo: the prohibition of human dissection. In both ancient Rome and throughout much of medieval Europe, cutting open a human body, even for scientific study, was seen as a desecration of the dead and was strictly forbidden by both law and religious doctrine. As a result, doctors and anatomists had a very limited and often wildly inaccurate understanding of how the human body actually worked. Their knowledge was based on ancient texts and the dissection of animals like pigs and monkeys, which they assumed were close enough to humans. This led to centuries of medical guesswork and surprising results during surgeries. The entire foundation of modern medicine depended on breaking this ancient law. 32. Chess is now regarded as the ultimate game of strategy and intellect, a gymnasium of the mind. But at various times and in different parts of the Islamic world, it was declared illegal. Several caliphates and religious scholars condemned the game for a number of reasons. Some argued that it was a form of gambling, which is strictly forbidden in Islam, even if no money was wagered. Others objected to the carved game pieces, which they viewed as a form of idolatry. But the most common complaint was simply that chess was a massive distraction. Scholars worried that players would become so engrossed in the game that they would neglect their daily prayers and other religious duties. It was seen as a dangerously addictive pastime that could pull a believer's mind away from God. 33. Today, the waltz is seen as the epitome of ballroom elegance, a classic, almost quaint dance. But when it first swept across Europe in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it was condemned as a shocking, scandalous, and downright indecent spectacle. Before the waltz, formal dancing involved intricate steps where partners barely touched fingertips. The waltz, however, introduced a revolutionary and horrifying concept: the closed hold. For the first time, a man would place his hand firmly on a woman's waist, and they would dance in a close embrace, spinning rapidly around the floor. Moral guardians of the era were absolutely appalled. They decried it as a shameless, indecent German dance that would lead to moral collapse. Preachers gave sermons against it, and in some parts of England and Germany, it was officially banned as a threat to public virtue. Humanity's talent for creating idiotic rules is truly endless, and we know this list is just the beginning. Now, it's your turn. What is the one jaw-droppingly stupid historical law that we were criminal to forget? Expose our oversight in the comments below. If you enjoyed this guide to historical insanity, show some support with a like and subscribe for more.